Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to your virtual tour of the Garden Island Tunnel Complex. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name's Colin Randall. I'm a somewhat semi-retired mining engineer. I'm a researcher and archivist with the Naval Historical Society. But my background to this is that for 10 years as a youth, I lived on Garden Island and lived in a house right next to the tunnel one of the tunnel entrances. So it was not unusual for myself, and I think my elder brother, to go into the tunnels. So after returning from working overseas nearly 2.5 years ago, and joining the Naval Historical Society once again as a volunteer, I had a keen interest in the tunnel complex under the hill. And Garden Island originally was an island in the middle of Sydney Harbour with two hills. The southern hill was removed and all the infrastructure was placed there. And then subsequently a dock was built between the island and Potts Point. So we'll be looking specifically at the northern end, the hill, which has got a hill which is about 20 metres at maximum height above sea level. The antecedents of the tunnel and the whole reason for the tunnel was drawn from the concerns that the Department of Navy had about the prospect of Sydney and Garden Island being aerial bombed. And the culprit that was considered to be the likely aggressor was Japan. And so from the early 1920s, Japan was seen as the likely aggressor in the Pacific. And while it had been an ally in the First World War, its march through Korea, what is now part of Mongolia, to Manchuria, Inner Mongolia, and into China, and its promotion of what was called the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere was one of the issues that that addressed the planners in the Department of Defence. Early in 1941, there was a very significant feeling that, and we've seen this from the National Archives of the federal government's cogitations, that in fact they looked to a point where Sydney would be under attack, and it would be from Japan, and they had seen the naval strength of Japan. So a decision was discussed. Well, a decision was taken that yes, they should have air raid tunnels under Garden Island, and this was taken in February of 1941, and the intention was that they would provide underground tunnels that would enable the workers on Garden Island to be protected for 24 hours from 70 tons of bombs. The Minister for the Navy at the time had been the previous Prime Minister, Billy Hughes, and he was the Minister for the Navy from 28th October through to October 1941. And it was Billy Hughes who basically said, look, we don't want to frighten anyone by actually starting the tunnels, making them think that Sydney is going to be under attack from the Japanese, because, of course, at the time, Australia was fighting the Germans in the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, with many Royal Australian Navy ships serving there. At the same time, Garden Island was being used to arm merchantmen because of the fears of German merchant raiders. So Billy Hughes said, look, let's just order 100 tin hats for the air raid wardens. and we'll get from the UK. We'll get some of their hand and memorandum, and let's hold some. Well, let's do some training for people for air raid wardens, for anti-gas attacks. So it was more a case of do things to pacify people, but let's not start the tunnels. But the defining moment, of course, was the attack on Pearl Harbour on the 7th of December 1941, and that attack clearly brought to the Australian shore that we were going to be a target. Within 4 days of the attack on Pearl Harbour, the decision was taken to build, excavate under the Northern Hill, sufficient tunnel area to accommodate the 1,400 persons, or mostly men, who worked on the dockyard. And the dockyard, it was seen that the dockyard workers were the valuable resource, not necessarily the physical things on the island, but the people. And so to understand how large the tunnels had to be, they decided that they would allocate for each person 7 square feet. And that decided the length of the tunnels and the area to be included. Now, by this time, the decision had been taken to build the new graving dock between Garden Island and the Potts Point. And the Metropolitan Water, Sewerage and Drainage Board were the main people to undertake that work. And they already had skilled tunnellers. And these tunnellers were already at work under Potts Point. And you can see in this photograph here the entrance of 2 of the tunnels that were driven at Potts Point to accommodate the detonator and explosives magazines for when they actually excavated the floor of the seabed to create the graving dock. So as you can see, for the men on the left here are actually pushing one of the trolleys out. And this was really hard graft. The wartime cabinet decided and set out in their financial certificate, and this was in the archives, National Archives, that provide a system of tunnelling under the hill. They approved 4 tunnels at a cost of £15,150. This was estimated by the Sewerage and Drainage Board as being the cost of the 4 tunnels. And this is the original design of the 4 tunnels. 4 entrances and a central chamber for people to stand. So the idea was the tunnel entrances, there was one to the east, one which was right next door. The house we lived in was here, and this was the entrance here. And another under the hill, and this and the 4th tunnel. Someone then said, well, okay, if we're going to have 1,400 men underground for 24 hours, maybe we've got to put some toilets in. So they designed a suite of to be able to have 38 toilets established. So this is a very rough cross-section, and you can see the majority of the tunnels were actually to be driven just above, on the same level of the dock. The hill's about 20 metres. This shows what later happened, where they put a shaft in and there were 2 chambers, and I'll talk about that later. So the tunnels, the dimensions were pretty simple. They decided that they were going to be 10 foot wide, in some tunnels 10 foot wide by 7 foot high, and others 12 foot by 7. They would while the tunnels were driven in sandstone, which was to be self-supporting, the idea was to put in heavy square set timbers to actually provide protection for the tunnel during the bombing. Later on, we'll see that the tunnels got larger, and I'll explain how that happened. So this is the original design, and you can see, pardon me, across the top of the timber, the big square set timbers, there's lagging to provide contact with the roof. Concrete floor with a gutter, and so all nicely designed. And this is what the tunnels finally constructed look like. You can see the timber sets, the concrete floor, and the gutter. Now, interesting enough, this tunnel is actually a Cockatoo Island, and this is what it looks like today. The difference between Cockatoo Island and Garden Island was the termites. Garden Island had a very particular type of termite that loved timber. So let's back to the sewage and drainage board's tunnelling method. Pretty well set out. They had been driving tunnels out under Sydney and around Sydney at this stage, for nearly 50 years. And they had a pretty set system. 4-footer tunnel every shift, two shifts a day, 8 feet a day, drill, fix the charges, blast, wait little time for the fumes to go down, enter the tunnel, use men to load a little wagon, pull it out by loco, and all pretty somewhat mechanised. But that wasn't what they did at Garden Island. The tunnels were big enough and long enough to really put in a full rail system. So they decided that they'd do the drill, the blast, muck out by hand, set the timbers by hand, excavate the floor, and concrete it. And this was all done manually. This is what it looks like when they were drilling. This was taken in one of the earlier sewage and drainage board's tunnels. But it's in Sydney sandstone, pretty much what it looked like. Pretty awful photograph, but underground photography wasn't that much at the time. So this was for bigger tunnels, they double bench. You can see 2 men on the bottom bench, 2 men pushing the drill. Really no support, just looking for the natural support of the strata itself. If the conditions got soft, they would go to some pretty elaborate steelwork, but they didn't expect that to be the case on Garden Island. So this is the photograph taken from the Potts Point side, and the little wagons, the side tipping wagons, took about a ton of material. Took 2 men to push it, and they take it to the end of the tip and then tip it out. This is when they were somewhat mechanised, battery operated loco, but with the same sort of side tipping wagon. Now, around about January, they'd already started in December, there was agitation by the Navy that it was all right looking after the 1,400 men who were working in the dockyard, but what about the 900 men or so who were on the ships? So a decision was taken to excavate a 5th tunnel and to make the tunnel more accessible to those on the ships. And the decision was, so where's the other tunnel entrances? With here, here. Ooh, sorry. I've done the wrong thing. Okay, let's get back to where we were. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Okay, so there were tunnel entrances here, 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 and so now a decision was taken to put a fourth tunnel in from this side, right near this ferry wharf. So here's the ferry wharf, and here's the tunnel entrance. Now this is, you can see here, the tunnels went straight in initially, and I'll explain why there was some very strange things happen in the tunnels themselves. So, okay, so they designed, here's the original design with the fifth tunnel. They decided the tunnel would go here, join up with the other four tunnels, the two chambers, and the toilets. Now, this tunnel had to avoid, if we go back, the tunnel had to avoid this 5,600 ton oil tank. So the tunnel entrance had to miss the oil tank and join up underground. So you can see the oil tank here. So they started off from each adit, 2 shifts a day, engineer in charge of the whole show, shot firer on each, in charge foreman on each shift, shot fire on each shift, a leading hand each face, so you've got 5 faces, 2, that's 10. 4 experienced tunnellers per face, so that's the crew, 35 people. So they started driving the tunnels, and you can see one tunnel has, that's the 5th tunnel, is already not going in the right direction. The tunnels, this is the one from the east, this is the Gun Wharf Tunnel. The tunnel from up, which was from the hill, and I'll just give you the names. Each of the tunnels was named, and this was very much similar to what happened in the First World War with the tunnels that were put under the Western Front. And these names are reminiscent of the Western Front, and a lot of British miners and workers. So Petticoat Lane was the one where halfway up the hill had to be cut and covered. Gun Mounting Wharf is the one from the east. Lambeth Walk, Saunders Corner, and the Northwest Passage was from the west. So pretty well all of them were just straight from the horizontal. And I think that the drainage design was 1 in 200. So the Petticoat Lane was right near the house where we lived. And you can see very substantial concrete and concrete walled. The Gun Mounting Wharf Tunnel, straight into a hillside with a concrete entrance. Lambeth Walk, somewhat battered, but pretty much concrete to start with. Saunders Corner, it seems to have been worked on using steel sets. And why is it called Saunders Corner? Well, for many Sydney-siders who went to meet their girlfriends and said, "I'll meet you at George Street from Central Railway," there was a jeweller's on George Street. And it was Saunders Corner where they said, "I'll meet you at Saunders Corner." So this is how that tunnel got its name. The Northwest Passage was somewhat steeper, and subsequently they did work to retain it. Okay, well, time moves on. So that was the 5th tunnel was decided. And with the Japanese attack and the movement down the Malaysian Peninsula, on the 15th of February, Singapore surrendered. And it was then decided that instead of just having people cramming into the tunnels, maybe we've got to put in facility for stretcher bearers who will have to go out and bring in the injured. And we'll also need a casualty clearing station to bring the casualties to. And it wasn't, that's a week later, that Darwin was bombed. Now, now they really understood that Sydney was going to be attacked at some time. But the big problem in the bombing of Darwin was the fact that the oil tanks had been attacked and burnt, and that there was a real problem that the amount of bombs that have been dropped in Darwin, that the amount of bombing in Sydney would be greater. So there was something like over 80 tons of bombs dropped in Darwin on that day, more than the bombs dropped on Pearl Harbour. Now, a month later, someone sent a very optimistic saying that the 5 tunnels were nearing completion. Well, this was highly optimistic, but if things had remained with a competent crew, they could probably have got the tunnels completed. But what happened is decision was taken to excavate tunnels at Darwin for fuel oil tanks. And the experienced tunnellers from Garden Island were sent to Darwin. Now we have a problem. The decision was taken that with the number of experienced fellows they had left, they could only drive 2 of the 5 tunnels. And they decided that they'd complement this group with workers from the Civil Constructional Corps. Now, these were men who were either too old for active service, or too young, or had medical conditions. Now, having stopped the tunnels, they decided 3 of the tunnels. You can see, in fact, that the tunnels they decided to push, they'd already driven through the Gun Wharf Tunnel, and they'd reached this point. They'd completed this one, and they had a problem here. The Petticoat Lane Tunnel and the tunnel they'd driven underground did not meet. So they knew there was a problem here, so they'd stopped that one. So they decided to drive these 2 tunnels. Now, the workers from the Civil Constructional Corps were, to say the least, unhappy about being put in the tunnels. Now, these 3 paintings are by Sir William Dobell, who was sent to Garden Island to record the construction of the graving dock. And this is the painting of a construction worker. And he recorded not only the fellows at Garden Island, but also at an aerodrome construction site. And you wouldn't want to be anywhere at 5 o'clock at knocking off, because they were on their way to the pub. Because in those days there was 6 o'clock closing, so there was a stampede. So the fellows from the Civil Constructional Corps did everything to avoid continuing to work in the tunnels. So they worked so slowly, they were hoping to be sacked. So from the minutes we know, the minutes of the cabinet, we know that these fellows aimed to be sacked, and to ensure they weren't, they were kept there. So you can see that the work proceeded not very quickly. Well, eventually they had all 5 tunnels connected, and you can see that there was a slight problem here they had to fix. And when they got down to the Northwest Passage, they had a very strange connection, so they just hit it there. So now they have to construct the stretcher bearer cuddies and the casualty clearing station. So this is what it looked like when it finished. Pretty good job. Concrete floor, drain in the floor, nice timbered. It would have looked fairly good. So now they had to excavate the restrooms and the toilets. So this is what they look like today. They've been substantially upgraded in terms of the roof support. but the facilities, having been modernised at one stage, are now out of use. So the casualty clearing station was built, and the stretcher bearer cuddies were installed on each of the tunnels. Yes, that's Fred Haynes, one of our volunteers, giving scale to the stretcher bearer at Petticoat Lane, which was subsequently, the cuddy was concreted. So the casualty clearing station, this is as is today with the steel supports, but they would have been timber at the time and probably a central timber support. Pretty much as this underground dressing station at the Ypres front in the First World War. And you can see they understood what a casualty clearing station underground, how it was going to be used. At this time, they decided that with the amount of bombs that were going to be dropped, we had to protect the people in the tunnels. So we're going to put in what's called blast baffle walls. And these were put near the entrance to the tunnels. And they were these are 12-inch concrete reinforced so that the blast could not come inside. Now, having taken that decision to protect the people inside, there was a clear understanding that no one would want to be on the outside of these blast walls. So now what we've got to do, we've got to make the tunnels wider to accommodate the people who are going to be on the inside of the blast walls. So now we have to widen the tunnels. And so what they had to do was to get a means of actually blasting out further and then deepening it. And today in the tunnels, we can see today the remnants of the horizontal holes and the vertical holes. And this is how they were able to get the tunnels to be 15 feet wide. Oh, I said earlier that the tunnels were designed to be 7 feet high. 7 feet is not a very convenient height if you're going to put in big timbers. And so out of just sheer facility, they're 8 feet high with the timbers underneath. So the tunnelling was going on, doing that, and then Sydney was attacked. It was attacked on the 31st of May by 3 midget submarines, and this is HMAS Cuttable, the Sydney ferry that had been converted to a dormitory. And on that night, 21 sailors lost their lives when the torpedo detonated against the seawall. So it was then obvious that Sydney was under attack, and if they needed any further understanding, on the 8th of June, one of the mother submarines shelled Sydney. Now this generated a absolute rethink about how Garden Island was powered. When the coal-fired boiler was put out of service and power was not generated on the island, in the 1930s, a underwater cable, Potts Point, provided power to the island. And with the aerial bombing of Sydney, potentially, or shelling, they decided that to put an emergency generating station on the island. And of course, it had to be protected. So it was going to be put into the tunnels. And so they decided that they would put it in the tunnels, and but they also had to make sure that the power would then be distributed. And of course, with the tunnels, they had the capacity to then move the power throughout the island using the tunnels as the means of transporting the power in cables. But they had to convert the power for the ships from AC to DC power. And to do that, they needed what was called mercury arc rectifiers. So what was decided was to install a diesel generating station. They needed a chamber for it. They needed a water supply, exhaust system, the transformers. They also decided to up the size of the blast walls to 24-inch and put them on all tunnels but one. They had to remove one of the blast walls because now with a engine underground, they had to be able to remove it or bring in material. So they had to put an armoured door. And that armoured door was going to go onto the Northwest Passage. So now we've got to drive a chamber. And this photograph from Sewage and Drainage Board is almost exactly the size of the chamber that was excavated. And you can see very clearly it was a two-bench system. You can see the shot holes, the timbers on which the blasted material is being shoveled, the two-man pushing crew, so two on the drills. These two guys would shovel and then push out, and the supervisor. A very neat job, trim shots on the roof, and no need of helmets, of course, but those were earlier days. So now we've got to get this material out, and this is when the battery loco came in, and they laid rail. Well, the rail had been there, so they excavated the chamber. Rail was laid, and this is what the chamber looks like today. It's concreted, and here are the bed for the two diesel engines. Their exhaust went through here, and I'll explain what these water tanks are for. But this is a very stable environment. The bed plates for the engines still there today. Some of the on the walls are some of the signage from the 1940s. So of course now we need ventilation. So we've now got to put a shaft in to come down to take the exhaust. So they had to find a site for the shaft. And what's interesting is they had to miss the signal station, miss the signal mast, and of course miss the tennis court. That was important. So the shaft would have a concrete cover, but shaft sinking for this was very simple. It would have it's a 44 feet, so it's around about 15-meter shaft. It would have just been hand winched and just driven by hand. Now, to connect the shaft to the chamber, we now have to put a tunnel in. And this is a photograph taken only a few months ago of the tunnel that leads to that shaft. And these are the pipes from the exhaust pipes from the two engines. And as you can see, the timber and the lagging, and this is would have been the men who drove this. They would have been working on their knees. This is only about it's about 1.4 meters high, so it's very small. So now we have the full complement. We have the stretcher bearers, some emergency lighting. We have the chamber for the diesel gensets, the tunnels leading to the shaft. We have now we've got the concrete. Now we put the transformers in. Now we've got the 24-inch concrete baffles, 12 inches here, the stretcher bearers transformer rooms here, and the concrete baffles. And so we've got transformers. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 three transformers, and here we have also on an armoured door. This is so that under attack, that's all complete. Well, of course, it's not finished. Everyone can think of something else. And they thought, we need to put the telephone exchange underground. So, okay, so now we have to construct a chamber for the telephone exchange. And so it was connected to the major chamber by a small tunnel and connected this way. So they then proceeded to install the telephone chamber. And 3 months later, they went, this is not a good idea. Humidity is a problem. And the next telephone exchange will come from UK and won't be able to be here for 6 months. So they removed it. So then someone decided that we should finally protect the people of Garden Island, the workers. And now we've got these tunnels. There's the tunnel entrance on the wharf, and this one here. That if this is bombed and the oil catches fire and the people are in the tunnels, we are going to have a problem. So they decided to put in a fire-fighting foam protection. Well, of course, to do that, they've got to put it underground. So they decided to put a tunnel from within the complex to the base of the oil tank and run firefighting foam in pipes to surround the tank if they're ever under attack. So the tunnel was very much an afterthought. It's 3 foot wide, 5 foot high, pretty roughly constructed, and unlined, no support. And we think that there was a slight problem. The person who designed this tunnel hadn't quite understood that there's almost a 8-metre difference in elevation between the floor of the tunnel and here. So having driven the tunnel initially horizontally, they have had to have driven an inclined tunnel. But we have seen only in the last few weeks a new plan has come that shows that they drove the tunnel horizontal almost to this point and then put a shaft in. So this is what this is the excavation of the tank back for the oil tank in 1917, and the entry point for where that tunnel comes in, it's actually a shaft, is around here. So this tank, which has served the Navy for 100 years, in 2 weeks ago they started its replacement. So the firefighting foam system required the foam agent, air and water, and it needed to be pumped. So this was the brand that they had used, fire foam, and you can see it becomes a very gluggy mess. And so in the chamber, they constructed two large water tanks, which actually provided the water to the simplex system. So this is the final layout. So we have 5 tunnels. We have gone through a series of events and decisions. And in the 8th of October 1942, the tunnel was finished. And the problems that were said in the inquiry then took place was inefficient labour, piecemeal authorisation, and even the delivery of material onto Garden Island was such a problem. And that included getting the explosives and detonators onto the island, because normally all the ammunition going onto ships was done with them not alongside the wharf. So, but the task that was completed was 2,000 feet of tunnel, nearly 8,000 yards of tunnel chambers. They've installed diesel genset, electrical distribution, ventilation, water, sewerage, pumping, drainage, installed and removed a telephone exchange. And the final cost, £67,000 approximately. And that was all reckoned up on the 26th of October. The final excavation cost alone was 47,000 odd pounds. And the rest of it was construction installation. So there was an inquiry into why the costs were, if you think the original estimate was £15,000, it was more than 4 times. But what came to hand, and we discovered this in the archives, is that the drawings that were used to make the claims for payment were all done after the event. And these are only described as bodgy plans, got approved by various people at various times, knowing that it had all been done on the fly, and everyone had to be paid at the end of the day. So the tunnels as they are remained after the war in pretty much a neglected state. In the 1960s, when as boys we were able to get in and have a look at the tunnels, the roof supports had either rotted out by fungus or eaten by termites. But in the 1970s and then the 80s, the blast baffle walls were removed, steel sets were put in for roof support, and in some of the softer areas, they put in sandstone. To get the blast baffle walls out, the only way they could remove them was thermal lances. The concrete and the steel was so hard. The tunnels were fully lit, and they were used for storage and also for a power and diesel pipeline. So this is what they look like today. Very impressive. What is obvious is, as I said, you can see the direction of drivage by the remnant shot holes. Places they're unlined, and the softer areas fully lined. They were used for storage, and this is Petticoat Lane fully. So from recent times, with the major upgrade to the Garden Island Defence Precinct, with new wharves, renewal of all the services, removal of the oil tank, the tunnels are being repurposed and renewed. So this is taken only within the last 6 weeks. This is looking down Gun Wharf to the entrance of Gun Wharf from Saunders Corner. And you can see they're getting ready to put in new water lines and pipelines. And they're also replacing places where they discovered some asbestos. So this is Northwest Passage Tunnel looking inside past the bend. And when you look out for the Northwest Passage, there's, I think, LO1 is HMAS Adelaide. It's blocking our view of the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. But you can see the construction has started for the new wharf, which will accommodate Adelaide and Canberra. So, on the completion of the tour of the tunnel complex works in 2022, the Society hopes to be able to welcome everyone to come on a visit and come and have a look at the tunnels. So we suggest you have a look at our website or give us a call to register your interest for a tour of the tunnel complex. And this is our David Michael, our President of the Naval Historical Society Australia. So they're saying, ready for a tour? Get on your high vis and your helmet, and let's take you there. So thank you one and all for this opportunity to take you through the tunnels of Garden Island. And I'd like to acknowledge the help from the Sydney Water, the archivist there, the many years of work put in by Norm Rivette and David Stockman in particular, who went to the National Archives and found all of the references to the tunnels. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your attention and open up for questions.
Colin, you have a few questions from Hugh. In the 1960s, a commander was using one of the tunnels under Cuttable as a location for R&D. I suppose you could confirm that, probably.
Okay, quite separately, I've done the research into the tunnels under Cuttable, and the original tunnel complex was substantially removed when they put in the foundations for fleet headquarters, and all that remained was the butt entrances of two chambers and a part of a tunnel. So that the original use of the tunnels was, I said, for storage of detonators and explosives, but was then they constructed two chambers for the use of as an air raid protection. But to the extent of what the two chambers are used for today, I don't know. But we have photographs, and we know the final shape of what remains.
Colin, also Dave Jones asks about the tours of the tunnels. When will we be doing tours?
Well, as I said, we were ready to do tours of the tunnels a year ago, but unfortunately the work that's involved in putting the new facilities in has delayed that. But we are hoping that once that work's finished and we get approval from Navy and Thales to run the tours. So we would run the tours for small groups, and we would do it probably going through Primrose Lane, Petticoat Lane rather, Petticoat Lane entrance there. But I would expect with COVID and other things that won't be until maybe middle of next year.
Dave Jones also asked, are there any tunnels going from GI under Sydney? I mean, you've covered it, the tunnels in GI. Are there more that go under Sydney?
Well, I've looked at all the tunnel information that is available. There are from Sydney down to Woolloomooloo some sewerage tunnels, but I am quite sure that from the work that was done from Potts Point, there was no tunnels. There was in the 1940s a very interesting activity writing to the paper saying that there should be tunnels under King's Cross. This would provide the material for the graving dock, and there should be tunnels. And a lot of newspaper talk, but to my knowledge, there are no tunnels.
One more of a comment from Hugh. A substantially full fuel tank, if hit, would probably have burst and flowed down the small foam tunnel into the other tunnels? Question mark?
No, what happened is the tunnel itself is, and I probably showed in the drawing, the tunnel itself, the pipes went through a very, very thick brick wall. So the tunnel was actually bricked up, only allowing the pipes to go through. So I would imagine that would have been designed to take the pressure of that hydrostatic head.